All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you for coming to my presentation. So this is my first conference presentation. I wasn't sure how nervous I would be, but then I got stuck in an elevator this morning. So nothing beats being traumatized before a presentation. Luckily, the MGM staff are really good, and the call button actually worked. So there's some lessons learned there. So one is make sure your recovery options actually work and they're well tested. And then if you're nervous for a talk, maybe get stuck in an elevator at 5:45 a.m. So today I'm going to talk about how Kroger implemented some anti-fraud measures and how we're securing sign in and sign up. My name is Karthik Kotha. I'm the Senior Engineering Manager at Kroger. So about me, I lead the customer identity, fraud, and privacy teams at Kroger. Before being a manager, I worked as a full-stack developer in Vue.js and Java for the most part. I currently live in Cincinnati, where Kroger is based. I used to live in Chicago, pretty much grew up there, went to school there, and worked at a couple companies in Chicago before moving to Cincinnati. About Kroger, so we are America's largest grocery company. We have stores all over the U.S. They're different brands, so depending on where you're from. In California, we have Ralph's. In the Northwest, Pacific Northwest, we have Fred Meyer. On the East Coast, we have Harris Teeter. So we have almost 3,000 retail stores, 11 million customers, both across online and in-store. We have pickup and delivery that's available to 98% of U.S. households. During the pandemic, of course, we saw a huge rise in e-commerce traffic. We have about over 70 million digital accounts that the SIAM team manages. We are starting to roll out a new robotic warehouse strategy where we will do grocery delivery in areas where we don't have Kroger stores. So Florida is a big market there, because you can see on the map there, we don't have Kroger stores, but we do have e-commerce in Florida. So today I'll talk about some of the North Star metrics we have on this project, our roadmap, how email verification was a key component to security, and then our migration to Azure AD B2C, and why we decided to go with a SaaS product instead of a custom-built one. And then once we have B2C in place, that allows us to leverage additional things like conditional access, and start layering on top of the more secure, more advanced security features. And I'll share some lessons learned. Okay. So one thing when we set out is we did not want to do mass password resets. You probably have seen this before when a company gets acquired or they switch IDPs. The easy way is to just ask all your customers to reset their password. But asking our 70 million customers to reset passwords was not going to fly from a business perspective. And there has to be no downtime, no revenue impact. We also can't make it too hard for a customer when we migrate to B2C and have them have to call to our Kroger call center. We also want to have 100% of our users email verified and then start to enable MFA capability. And then we also want to reduce credential stuffing attacks, chargebacks, ATOs, and multi-accounting. If you don't know, so ATO is account takeover. Multi-accounting is more abuse. So these are customers who sign up for multiple accounts from a single device or a couple devices. We see this often when we have new coupons, right? A coupon is generally tied to one account. So people create multiple accounts to take advantage of savings. We also have pharmacies at Kroger, so we need to be privacy and HIPAA compliant. Okay, so on the SIAM team, we manage these three main profiles: shopper, health and wellness, and developers. Developers is a bit of a gray area because that can be associates, vendors, and also customers. Shoppers is our main use case, right? So that's your pickup, delivery, shopping for groceries, clipping coupons. Health and wellness is our pharmacy side, and that's, of course, more secure. This is where we need to implement identity proofing. There's lots of strict HIPAA and PHI laws we have to follow there. Associates is a separate separate function at Kroger that is workforce identity. You see that in the industry. Customer and workforce are pretty split up. Okay, so our journey to have more advanced security features, we started to evaluate what the current landscape is, right? So we are starting from basically square one at Kroger. We did not have much security. During the pandemic, the focus was on revenue, making sure customers can order groceries. There wasn't too much focus on security, but now, as with most companies, it's the year of optimization, so there's a lot more focus now on security and anti-fraud measures. On the SIAM team, this is a project that came to my team. None of us are identity experts. We had to learn on the go. So when we first started out, the very first thing we actually had to do was disable password grant type on the mobile app. This was getting constantly hit with bots, and it was easy to attack. Kind of surprising that it was there for so long. So we shut that down. We switched the mobile apps to use PKCE, which is the most secure flow for the mobile app. And after that, it was like the next day, the bot attacks went completely flatlined. So next, what we've implemented is email verification. And the reason we focus on that first is we want to make sure that customers can get a code when we send it through the MFA code challenge. So we had to first make sure customers had access to their email. And then we launch Azure AD B2C. That is when we really start layering on top MFA, because B2C provides an easy way to do MFA challenges, and then start layering on behavioral biometrics, device fingerprinting, and then also phone factor. Now, I know there's controversy about phone factor not being secure, but right now, we want to make sure our customers have a second way to do MFA. Right, it's not MFA if it's just email factor. If someone can't get a code in time, because we've seen issues where code is not delivered within 15 minutes because of their email server, or they're using some corporate email. We get a lot of complaints about that, so we want to make sure that customers have a phone factor. Cool. So this is our journey towards email verification. We made it mandatory to require email verification at sign-up on Azure AD B2C. And then at sign-in for existing users, we started to nudge users where it's hard to actually tell that you can skip email verification. We also wanted to allow users to change their email if they didn't have access to it, because you could have made a Kroger account with a random email address that you did not even own. For some of the smaller apps, we did force email verification at sign-in. These were mostly health and wellness applications where we had security questions, and we wanted to replace those with MFA. And then later on, we'll be enabling email factor and phone factor so that we can enable MFA. And then this year, we're really focused on the enterprise rollout of Azure AD B2C. So why B2C? Today, we have hodgepodge of custom-built token and session-based authentication. We have the mobile apps use token-based, but the web app uses session cookie-based auth. It's really hard to work with. Devs are scared to touch anything related to auth. There's multiple times when someone changed, like a front-end web developer would change one thing and then sign-in would be broken for all the web apps. And that's a huge impact. It was using custom-built libraries or no libraries at all. It was also difficult to understand the boundaries of authentication and authorizations. Developers assume that just because a user is authenticated, they're authorized. So that's a lot of learning that we had to do, and we still have to do for developers at Kroger. So of course, custom-built, lots of security holes. We're not identity experts, as I mentioned. Even the SIAM team is learning on the go. So Azure AD B2C, why switch to a vendor? So this quote, I don't know if it's the exact quote, but it was on an Okta shirt last year when I came to Identiverse. Friends don't let friends build their own auth. It's a common phrase that I use at Kroger when someone asks me why we want to use a vendor for authentication. So B2C brings universal login capability with single sign-on, which we just launched our first app with single sign-on, I believe a week or two ago. And it really enables a frictionless way for customers to authenticate. But the caution there is with Safari and Firefox, there are some issues with third-party cookie compatibilities. So make sure you test across all the browsers and every version before you roll out SSO. So B2C has built-in MFA capabilities. And then the third point here is really key, the Microsoft Auth libraries. Because Microsoft provides client libraries, it makes Auth approachable to developers. Because most developers, they just want to move past the authentication. They want to work on their features. So the Auth libraries make it easy and secure. And then B2C also allows integration with other vendors, which we are working with quite a few, including ones that are here at Identiverse. And then also, B2C has built-in social sign-in capabilities. We did some custom integrations with Google and Apple. It was sort of half built out, but with B2C, we're actually going to turn off all social sign-in in our legacy system, and then we're going to roll out B2C, and then we're going to reevaluate if we want to turn those back on. Okay, so how do we get all apps into B2C? So one of our North Star metrics was no mass password resets, right? So we built, and the folks who built this are actually here. So Paul and Soumya built key parts of this. It's a just-in-time migration mechanism. So when users enter their email and password, the first time they visit a B2C page, we first authenticate them against our legacy system if they're not in B2C already. And then without moving any passwords around, B2C will just save the password from the password field into B2C. So that was a key feature. We worked, it took a while to get that in place, but it was really important to do that. Along with the second point here, the dual password rights, as well as dual syncing of any profile changes, because we wanted to stagger the launch. We want to avoid a big bang release where we turn on B2C for all Kroger apps and banners at once. That was too risky. And we're now even working to go even more granular and turn on B2C only for sign-in and leave create account password changes in the legacy so that we can speed up the learning and, again, reduce risk of a big release. Okay, so once we have B2C in place, we can really focus on device fingerprinting and some of the more advanced anti-fraud tools. And early on, we were actually starting to build out our own fraud engine based on signals that we have access to within the Kroger ecosystem. But we learned quickly that's not a good idea, because if we did build a custom fraud engine, we would only have view into our Kroger ecosystem. So we felt it wasn't worth the cost and effort. We'd rather invest somewhere else and then use a vendor who can say, for example, if a user is creating an account, a vendor can see if that email has an account at Target, Walmart, Best Buy, if they've seen that anywhere else. If not, then the vendor will return a risk score that's probably higher than if they've seen that email somewhere else. You do be careful when you're assessing vendors, right? There's many ways to achieve this. Some vendors will have code that's really bulky and might slow down your app. And then be thoughtful when you use that risk score. And I'll talk a little bit more about this on when and where to add friction based on that risk score. Okay, so MFA, B2C makes it really easy to do an MFA flow. It's just a redirect. We give the client app a URL, say, hey, if you want the user to go through a step-up auth, here's the URL for it. And we let clients decide, right? So the token from B2C will indicate when the user last went through MFA. And if you're a developer on the payments team or a product manager on checkout cart, you can decide if you want the user to go through a step-up auth based on whatever signals you would like, whether it's the last time they went through step-up or if the email was changed recently, mailing address was changed recently. We leave that up to the teams to decide. And then our fraud vendor also lets us do trusted device. It'll indicate if the user is signing in from a new device, and then we can send them through B2C's MFA flow. Okay, so conditional access, this is really where everything comes together, and we can use B2C and then our fraud vendor as well as internal signals to put friction for the user. So we look at signals, right? Typical signals like signing on new device, user behavior. If a mouse is moving too quickly, that's probably not a human. If a user is modifying credit cards, adding a new credit card, modifying delivery address or other sensitive profile data. Account create data is actually a pretty big signal for fraud. New accounts tend to have more fraud than accounts with a long history. Email enumeration is another big one. This is one where we had some cases where there were users that were not fraudsters that were just enumerating emails, like testers do this often, or we had a city that was creating emails for their homeless shelters and food shelters, but that triggered our anti-fraud rules. And it's really cryptic because we don't tell the users that the account create failed or sign-in failed because we think they're fraudulent. So it took like that. The complaints like bubble up to the CEO and they come back down. So just be careful of when you put in place these sort of anti-fraud tools, like how are users going to contact you? What's the support path for users? So our fraud vendor returns a score. Most vendors will do this. And based on the score, we will add some targeted friction. These are some of the things that we are planning to add based on our vendor score. So for example, if it's a 60, we might trigger B2C's step up auth MFA flow. If it's 80, we might sign the user out, clear all user sessions, require the password to be reset, or send a transaction to a manual review queue. We do see often with chargebacks, often the items purchased are things like Instapots, which were popular fraud items during the pandemic because they were easy to resell. There's actually a list from ORC, which is Organized Retail Crime, that publishes a list of popular fraudulent items. And if a high-value transaction has those items, we can send it to a manual review queue. Or if it's 99, it's block the account permanently. It's likely an account that we've already identified as fraud. Okay, so some of the lessons learned with B2C. It is XML-based custom policies. It's not super easy for developers to understand. There's a learning curve to it. There's no UI editor like other vendors have. Where I think Auth0 has it. So yeah, it's not super approachable. There's no passkey support yet, but that's something I believe Microsoft's working on that. Single sign-on is a powerful feature that really lets us reduces customer friction when you have multiple apps. We also don't have to build our own IDP, and that is again important from a security as well as developer experience perspective. And then, like I mentioned before, B2C is able to integrate with a lot of new and existing vendors. So with that, that's really it. Thank you for coming. And yeah, like I mentioned, we're just at the beginning of our journey. We are this year starting to implement a lot more advanced security features, and I hope to have more as we start implementing these and come back and report to you all. Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
Hi, Sarah McCarthy from BC Dynamics. How do you define the fraud signals or indicators? Do you work with the vendor to define what things to look for? How do you make that determination?
Yeah, it's trial and error. So the vendor will come up with a risk score, and they'll give general guidelines. And then we use that score with other internal signals to come up with our own score to decide. So yes, it is a lot of trial and error. It's not like a one and done thing. You need to keep maintaining it and modifying what you want to do for a risk score. Yeah. Yes?
What would you say was the biggest challenge that you and your team faced throughout your journey so far?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of it is how do we bring on board other teams? Like I said, teams they're not experienced with identity. Right, they're not using MSAL. How do we bring them on this journey? Identity, it's hard to get prioritization for identity initiatives, especially because it's not a direct revenue driver. I think that was our biggest challenge. Yeah. Yes?
Your associates were sort of out left
Yeah.
on the side. Can you talk about who were the associates, why were they left out, and what their authentication experience is?
Yeah, that's a good question. So associates, generally you will see, I think even like Okta, they have separate products for workforce and customer. There's different privacy laws, there's different security requirements for associates. It's also a lot more, if an associate account is compromised, there's a huge risk to the company. Whereas if a customer account is compromised, a little less so. So we have a different team, and I know some of the members are here, that manages workforce identity. And just for like security, different laws, different policies, it's a separate system. As far as like what is in place, I know we have a couple vendors as well as custom built ones for workforce. Yes?
How do you stop impersonation on the Azure AD? Do you synchronize constantly with your local AD or these users?
When you say impersonation, are you talking about like account takeovers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
During COVID especially, I've heard this from Fidelity and others that really 40% of the fraud happens just using cloud identities. Right? So do you have any policy in place that ensures that the same users are on-prem, on the same guys, and the same users on Azure?
Yeah, so we have a sync, right? So when you create an account either on-prem or on Azure, it will do a dual write. So there won't be any like duplications. There shouldn't be. But we're also not a bank, so we are doing identity proofing, right, for our pharmacy customers. However, outside of that, we don't really care too much if you're creating multiple accounts. So it's like synthetic ID fraud it's not like a human can only have one shopper account. They can technically create multiple. That's not too big of a concern for shoppers. Yeah. Cool. Yes?
How long did it take for you to move from legacy to your new B2C?
We're still on the journey. It took almost like 2 years to get the first client app onto B2C. And then now we're planning to do the rest by the end of the year. So that's all the 70 million customers.
So you started this 2 years ago?
Yeah, 2 years ago. Yep.
And a follow-up question to that.
Yeah.
When did you decide to open up MFA enrollment for the new users or existing users?
Yeah, so it depends on the client app. On pharmacy, for pharmacy apps, it was immediate. They wanted to get rid of security questions, so all customers had to do MFA once they were on B2C. For shoppers, we're still thinking on when to do MFA because that's a little less, it doesn't need to be as secure, but we're still thinking through that, especially like we want to do new device for sure, but then also maybe if you're changing your credit card. Yeah. Yes?
So you're doing dual rights across
Yeah.
password, right, and for 70 million customers. How long do you think it would take for all customers to visit the site and then go through the dual right process so that you can truly get rid of the legacy?
Yeah, that's a good question. So one project we did last year, it was actually not that long. I think we kept it live for a year, the hair cedar. Yeah, about a year. So I would assume for the rest of the rollout, probably a year at most. Yeah. So what happens at the end of the year is if they haven't logged in within that span, they will have to set a new password. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions? All right. Thanks, everyone.